Many words associated with theater have roots in Greek. Theater comes from the word theatron, meaning seeing place. Drama comes from the word dram, meaning to do. Many dramas were presented in the theater in Athens, yet only 43 plays have been found intact. There were, however, many plays, comedies, and commentaries left in fragments. The roots of Greek theater lie in the cult of Dionysus, the god of wine and fertility, and one of the Olympians honored in the Greek world. These celebrations occurred in December in the countryside and March in the city, and featured competitions in music, singing, dance, and poetry. And one of the earliest winners was said to be a wandering bard called Thespis. Thespis astounded audiences by leaping on the back of a wooden cart and reciting poetry, as if he was the character whose lines he was reading. In doing this, he became the world's first actor. There were two major types of Greek plays. There was comedy, which was derived from the word tragos, meaning goat, and the other was comedy, which was derived from the word ode, meaning song. A tragedy received its name from how it was performed. A tragedy had actors who wore goatskins and danced like goats. The best performers were given a kid goat as a prize. Tragedies were based largely on the myths of stories of the old narrative epic poems, of which only two main ones, the Iliad and the Odyssey, both written by Homer, survive. Tragedies were stories about suffering. Not all of them had unhappy endings. However, they all pointed out that though people suffered, most individuals were able to carry on despite their suffering. These plays were performed by a chorus and a maximum of 3 male actors. Women were not allowed on stage. In order to help the audience figure out who the performers were supposed to represent, costumes and masks were used. Comedy was an extremely popular form of performance as well. Greek comedies were about the present. At first, these plays focused mainly on lighthearted subjects. Many poked fun at politicians and leaders, but later they did away with the chorus and started to poke fun at a certain kind of person. Comedic playwrights increasingly criticized the existing political system while promoting new ideas. Originally, most ancient Greek plays were not published. Playwrights wrote them with the intention of them being seen and heard, not read. The plays were later published, but originally they usually had to be memorized. This method of preserving material without writing it down is another example of oral tradition. Only a few works of 5 of the ancient Greek playwrights survive to this day. These include the tragedies written by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and the comedies of Aristophanes and Menander. The earliest of these, Aeschylus, composed about 80 plays, including mostly tragedies. His play Persians is the oldest surviving play. According to Aristotle, Aeschylus was responsible for introducing a second actor into the format of the theater, resulting in dialogue that could develop much more freely. Up until that point, there had only been one actor, and therefore the only spoken dialogue took place between a representative of the chorus, a group of dancing singers who performed at the core of the dramatic performance, and the actor. Aeschylus was also responsible for the improvement of the theater by introducing a definite actor's apparel. This apparel included the 3 essentials of the tragic costume: the mask, a long sleeve robe, and the tall buskins, high boots with very thick soles. Sophocles wrote about 120 dramas, 7 of which have survived. The most famous of his works is Oedipus the King, which was considered by Aristotle to be the model drama, and Oedipus the model hero. Sophocles was responsible for the invention of skenographia, or scene painting, therefore becoming the first playwright to put a background behind the actors in his plays. Sophocles was also responsible for the addition of a third speaking character into the format of theatrical productions. Euripides wrote about 90 plays, 18 of which still survive. Euripides was educated as a free thinker, and as a result he approached the traditional myths as raw material that he could change and shape as he pleased. However, in order to keep within the lines of the established features of the myth, it became necessary for Euripides to use the idea of supernatural intervention in his plays, resulting in scenic changes. Mechanical devices like cranes, trapdoors, and rolling platforms had to be invented, so therefore allowing the gods to appear and disappear quickly. At the beginning, the actors were chosen by the playwrights. Later, when theater competition became tough, the need of professional actors emerged. Some actors tended to attach themselves to a playwright. The actors were always men, even if they were playing female roles. Costumes did many things. They showed whether the actor was male or female, rich, poor, priest, or any other occupation. In order to look taller and more impressive, they wore wooden shoes with tall heels. The shoes that they wore had no left or right, but they were the same for both sides. They dressed in long robes with vertical stripes. The most essential part of their disguise was the mask. These masks were made ad hoc, and they had big holes for the mouth and the eyes. The female mask had bigger mouths and eyes. Another reason for wearing the mask was that the mask amplified the actor's voice, making it possible to hear him everywhere in the theater. Next, because the masks were pretty simple, the audience would be able to pay more attention to the actor's actions rather than his appearance. Special emotions were expressed on the mask, so the audience knew if a character was happy, upset, tired, or scared. Since the mask could be seen even in the last rows, the audience could tell how the character was feeling. The theaters were large open-air structures constructed on the slopes of hills. The theater was constructed of three major parts: a skene, an orchestra, and the audience, or a koilan. The skene was the place where the actors performed. It is a little like a modern-day stage. It was originally a hut, tent, or booth. It was the background for the play. It was used as a backstage area where the actors could change their costumes and masks. But it also served to represent the location of the plays, which was usually set in front of a palace or a house. The skene faced the audience. In the beginning, the skene was a palace or a temple. Later on, tables were added or other themes were painted on panels, such as the marketplace, woods, army camps, or the sea were put onto this background. Most of the time, there were 1 or 3 entrances on the skene for the actors. The orchestra was the main part of the stage, where the chorus was located. It was the place where the chorus danced and sang. The orchestra was in front of the skene and was at the center of the theater. The orchestra was the acting place, especially in the early years, although gradually the action moved from the orchestra to the skene. The koilan was the auditorium of the Greek theater. Its shape was semicircular, built around the orchestra. It had divided in 2 levels, an upper and a lower. The front seats were reserved for officials and priests. The theaters were originally built on a very large scale to accommodate the large number of people on stage, as well as the large number of people in the audience, up to 14,000. The audience sat on tiers of benches built on the side of a hill. Greek theaters then could only be built on hills that were correctly shaped. By the time of Sophocles' death, 120 years after Thespis' victory in the first Athenian drama competition, the golden era of Greek drama was on the decline. Athens, whose culture had generated the birth of theater, would be overrun by the Spartans. It would later be torn apart by constant warring with other city-states, eventually falling under the control of Alexander the Great and his Macedonian armies. Theater continued, but it would not return to the same creative heights until Elizabethan England 2 millennia later.